Welcome to MSP Unplugged, episode number 40, Dark Web. I'm your host, Jeff Halash. This is our live show where we discuss different ways to run your IT business, whether it's managed services, consulting, break fix, or anything in between. Let me introduce the co-hosts. We have Paco Lebron from ProdigyTeks. Paco, how you doing?
Better than good, better than most.
Good to have you again. And we also have brand new Matt Solomon from ID Agent. Matt, how are you doing?
Doing excellent. I can tell I'm in the right place based on your background. We're going to get along very well together.
Everybody seems to really like my Star Wars background. Now, I did have just a short little story, and somebody had asked me a couple weeks ago, what is that little kid coming out of the back of my wall? And for those that aren't watching the video, it's basically Han Solo and Carbonite. And I told this individual, I said, hey, you know what? Go ahead and watch, because they were like, I started watching the Star Wars movies, and they just didn't interest me. They were more of a Star Trek fan. I'm like, that's fine. I said, listen, I said, get rid of the rest of the movies. I said, go back and watch 4, 5, and 6.
Yeah.
I said, those are the originals from 1977, 80, and 83. I said, watch those 3 individual movies, and you'll either like it or hate it, but just get through those. And if you like it enough, you can go back and watch the prequels and whatever the sequels and all that kind of stuff later, if it interests you. But if not, at least you'll have the iconic story, which is enough in the Star Wars universe, as far as I'm concerned, with those 3 movies.
Yeah.
That's my thought.
I would agree. And you could probably save yourself the time of any of the prequels.
Yeah, exactly. I actually enjoyed them for what they were, because the cinematography, the CG that they were able to use kind of enhanced things a little bit. But I'm still, the technology that they used back in 1977 for doing the space battles and all that kind of stuff was just revolutionary.
Yeah.
And really astounding. So when you think about the time period, you're like, wow, that's really cool. All right. So let's move on from that. But that was my little story, even though we don't have a regular section. All right. So anyways, let's moving on. We're going to talk about the dark web today and some of the intricacies of what it is, what it isn't, and what you can do about it to save your business and save your clients' businesses. But before we do that, I want Matt to go into a little background story and talk about how you got into technology and how you got to be with ID Agent.
Sure. A little bit of luck and the right timing, and a lot went into it. But the founder and CEO of ID Agent, Kevin Lancaster, I actually worked for him in another business he was running, was doing government contracting. And he, somehow came up with this idea about, monitoring the dark web for compromised credentials. I don't know every backstory on that, but when he brought me the idea, I had no idea what he was talking about. And at the time, I didn't even know what a managed service provider was. And this is probably late 2015. And I decided to take the leap of faith, I guess. And we started off talking to enterprise customers, so Fortune 500 companies. And we had this tool inside the product and it was only meant for me, because it was just me and Kevin at the time, and I could put the domain of an organization and pull up, their 100 most recent emails and passwords on the dark web. And so we kind of used that report originally to get our foot in the door to talk to these Fortune 500 companies. And I'm telling you, we got our foot in the door to some major, Starbucks, Walmart, Panera Bread, Best Buy. We signed the largest law firm in the world, largest sports league in the United States, an entire state government very early on. But it was weird. We were a little ahead of the time. People weren't taking compromised credentials on the dark web very seriously in that moment. And we started to kind of shift gears and say, well, managed service providers, Kevin had talked a little bit about it. And at some point we just sat down and said, maybe this is a complete direction. We need to switch gears and go to the channel and see what happens. And it was just like overnight, our entire fortune of luck just changed. And truthfully, some major breaches happened that really helped, I guess, emphasize how dangerous a compromised credential was. And I'd say the 4 that stand out to me is, 1, the Office of Personnel Management got breached. So you had one single compromised credential led to 800,000 exposures, with the OPM. Dropbox, MySpace, and I know MySpace is like really old, but a
Wow.
lot of people got exposed. I mean, hundreds of millions of people got exposed. And LinkedIn. LinkedIn's probably the key one because that exposed businesses, business emails, and it was clear text password. It wasn't encrypted passwords. These were clear text. And that was a game changer in terms of like getting attention on it. And, just kind of, I guess, make the last part of the story a little faster. We went from no partners in May of 2017 to 2 years later having 2,000 partners in 30 countries worldwide, and went from 2 employees to 50 and got acquired by Kaseya. It was a once in a lifetime experience. It was a wild ride, and I'm still part of it, but it was just an intense time. It was a blue ocean. No one in this space was doing dark web monitoring when we launched it.
That is a great background story. And I think a lot of times, would you say that a lot of things probably start at the enterprise level that people are supporting and then kind of move into the IT space more down to our size businesses?
Yeah, I mean, you see that a lot, and sometimes it's purposeful. In our case, I don't think there was ever a plan to go down to the MSP. That just happened to be the course we ended up going, and then we kind of just never looked back. We kind of just left the enterprise level. But the cool story that we were still able to tell, because even though we didn't have a ton of enterprise customers, to be able to, the message we would talk about to our MSP partners is you can still go into your customer and say, this was an enterprise designed platform, which it was. It was actually designed really originally for government agencies, and you're getting the exact same platform that an entire state government is currently utilizing, or the largest law firm in the world is utilizing, and that still stands today. It's the truth. It's no different. It's the same product. It's not going to cost them nearly as much, obviously. But I think that's a really amazing message to be able to articulate to a small business.
That's good. Paco, when you think about things like the dark web, what tales of woe come up into your head, or what things are you dealing with in your business when it comes to dark web monitoring, or even thinking about searching the dark web for credentials for your clients?
So it's funny, when you first said it, I was like, the really bad bar here in Chicago, but no. So, I think it's a very big piece that everyone's kind of trying to figure out right now, right? I think that it's down to the point where even a lot of commercial companies are starting to advertise dark web monitoring with their credit reports, credit monitoring, and things like that. So it's definitely becoming a piece of a system where everyone just kind of took for granted, or just didn't realize that aspect of an exploit or a hole in their systems, right? I think what really drives it home for us, at least for our businesses, is that a lot of our clients will utilize the same personal passwords that may have been done on their personal emails that they got breached, and not connected to that. If someone just did a real quick search and found out what their business, if they were a business owner or working at a particular business and using that same password, is where that's the game changer, right? So I think a lot of times they're saying, well, yeah, it's Yahoo. Yeah, it's from Funimation or whatever companies that had a breach at one point during the last several years. If they're still using that password everywhere else, it just takes a couple of good guessing and bots to figure it out and kind of move forward from there, right? And I think that's the purpose of why it's important to have tools like, ID Agent and others that are in the space, because really you can use some of the free things that are out there, but you don't have the full picture of what's going on to help protect your client. You can tell them this has happened, but without any real ammunition, which I'm sure Matt will go into in a little bit here, you're preparing yourself for that conversation and what is the actionable piece to it, and how you can obviously make money doing it as well, whether it's including in your services or trying to get your foot in the door.
Yeah, I think it's one of the approaches that a lot of people will take when it comes to, correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, but sticking your head in sand and hoping that nothing comes back to bite you is just not a reality anymore. I think you need to be proactive on these things in order to at least have a base of information to start from and go, okay, we need to be a little more aware of what's out there and how to deal with it. Now, the dark web itself, can you give us like a little background on what is the dark web for those that don't know, and what does it mean out there when people talk about things like the dark web?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you know, it originated with the Navy in its origin story. But usually when I talk about what the dark web is, you know, my simple kind of thing is it's an unindexed area of the internet. So most people, I mean, in terms of making it relatable, think of, you know, Google and things like the search engines. It doesn't exist there, right? And it's through the Onion router, the Onion, you know, Tor. So it's interesting, you know, and then I kind of talk about some of the layers, right? Because there's the intranets of the world, like where universities, you know, that's kind of the one layer, but that's not really the dark web. That so there's different layers underneath these unindexed areas of the internet. But funny enough, like my biggest advice to MSPs in general is to not even talk about what the dark web is, because it's actually not as important as you think it is. Like you don't need your customers to know much about the dark web, other than the fact that focuses on why compromised credentials on the dark web put them at risk. And, you know, and of course, look, there's other layers to the dark web that are way worse than compromised credentials. I mean, there's human trafficking, there's drugs, you know, it's where a lot of nefarious things are taking place. But I would say my biggest message when an MSP is talking about the dark web is maybe you have one slide, very high level. And I know a lot of people use the iceberg as kind of, that's usually the one they show. It's, you know, has the things that you can see above and everything below is considered the dark web. But I just try to shift people's attention to the actual compromised credential that's exposed. And I thought Paco brought up a really couple good points when he was talking about it. There are lots of different services, and, you know, now especially with, like, you know, Equifax, and everybody says they're offering it, and they are. The difference is when you're using it through us, via an MSP, is you're actually getting the passwords. You know, you go to some of these free sites or some of these offerings, they're just telling you, hey, you got exposed in this breach. But we all know, if you've talked to a small business about security, they want to see proof. And so you can bring them a list and say, these have all been exposed. And they're going to say, well, how can you tell? And the only way to really show them is actually showing them their password. And that's the clarity that it does. And it's, I mean, I honestly don't feel like I'm speaking hyperbole. If anybody's ever heard me, having access to this data, to me, empowers an MSP to talk about security like no other tool. It leads to so many other conversations. I've said it from like day one when we were first entering the channel. And it's one of the reasons at the time, before we got acquired, every other security company wanted to do webinars with us because it helped sell their product. So if you were a multi-factor authentication company, well, we make perfect sense, because we can prove why you need multi-factor authentication, or we can prove why you need DNS filtering. We can prove why you need policies and onboarding and offboarding. So it's just been unbelievable. And, you know, I mean, and I know we'll share lots of different stories of how MSPs use this as a tool to get their foot in the door, but also just to have a conversation around security, which they struggle to sell. They struggle to sell security. It's the one thing that you're going to show somebody. Like, I can go into a meeting and say, this could happen, and this is very likely to happen, versus this actually has already happened. It's just I think it's a game changer in terms of starting that conversation.
Yeah. And I think even then, well, like you mentioned, is that there's those small businesses that want the proof, and then there are the small businesses that had no clue what they used on some of those breaches for some of those services. Like, yeah, okay, yeah, great. I think I remember the password that was used there, and I'll try not to use that one anymore. But having it right then and there for them to say, nope, this is the password here. Now it's oh man, I have that in 5 other sites. Or B, it's like, well, I haven't used it in forever, and now I know not to reuse that password again, right? So that's that other, going back to having that complete picture when you're talking about why this solution, why you want to talk about the problems versus actually just talking about like the dark web, like exactly like you said. Because I think everyone just hears dark web and then their mind just starts to go into other areas instead of you just focusing specifically, like you said, like, look, here's what's going on. This is what we found. This is what we need to go ahead and address.
Yeah. And I was just going to add, you know, it's so interesting with the report when people review it. I can almost tell you exactly what objections they're going to have when they look at a report. And this is why the education is so important. And, you know, I see comments sometimes like, oh, dark web monitoring is, you know, a fear mongering type of tool. And we don't train any of our partners to use it in that way. You know, look, it's a scary thing if you're compromised or your credentials are out there, but you're only providing an actual fact. These things are out there. They're out there for the public to look at. So you need to be aware of them. I mean, Jeff, you mentioned like your head in the sand. Yeah, you can either be aware of this stuff or not. It's as simple as that. And, you know, I can't tell you how many trade shows I've been to where I say, do you want to do a dark web scan? And they're like, nope, because they don't want to see it. You know?
I don't want to know. I don't want to know.
Yeah. But the one objection, and it's really interesting. I don't know if Paco's come across this one too, but when I used to show the report to people, they would skip over the 20 active employees that have been exposed, and they'll go directly to the employee who hasn't worked there for like 3 years. And they'll say, why do I care? That person hasn't been here for 3 years. And so like we've trained our MSPs to challenge them on that and be like, well, what was their role? And did you have onboarding and offboarding policies? Because yeah, you may have shut off their Active Directory, but do you have any idea where they were logging in with that work email? And a lot of people don't. And I can tell you, I mean, I've got plenty of stories I'll share, but one I'll share right now, which is one of the first ones we had heard, was the MSP did exactly that. The person hadn't been there in 3 years. They challenged the small business. They said, what could she have been logged into? And they went back, they logged into 4 different applications, including a bank account, including Staples, which had access to the, you know, ACH banking information. To me, this is the worst one, I think, the CRM system. So imagine this, right? And because this is the thing, everybody thinks about the network password being the biggest issue, and it ultimately is. But if I have access to your CRM system with every one of your customers, and I just set off a ransomware to every one of your customers, you're probably going to be out of business in the next couple of weeks. And we've seen it. MSPs, unfortunately, we've seen MSPs go out of business that have gotten hit where it went on to their clients. I mean, MSPs have to be vigilant too. And that's why this type of stuff is just as important internally, because it's the one-to-many concept. And I would encourage any MSP that has professional services clients like law firms, accounting firms, those are the biggest targets. Because if I can get 100 small businesses through a law firm, I mean, doesn't it make sense for me to go after that law firm versus 100 separately? So, you know, it's something to think about as an MSP.
Man, a lot of good thoughts there. A lot of good things that people really need to kind of take a step back. And I've never understood the fear mongering. I get it from a standpoint of, I think when I think about what an MSP is supposed to do, at the end of the day, you're supposed to protect your customer. And if you do that with whatever tools you have available to you, that's going to make you way better at what you do versus just going, yeah, we're only going to deal with it when we get hit by it. And by that time, like you said, Matt, it's too late. Mm-hmm. Everybody's already been hurt. It's already an issue. And the cleanup is such a mess. And even if you can survive that, your reputation, even if you survive the financial burden, your reputation will be in the tank in a lot of industries.
No, absolutely.
So I guess, you know, for me, I think when trying to leverage the service and trying to, you know, for an MSP that may not have thought about getting into dark web or has and just hasn't made the right initiative or figured out how to use it properly, I guess I'll separate this question out in 2 folds. You know, if, you know, I have heard where there are MSPs that will take the service, they will run it against a potential prospect, they'll send a report out, and then they may either get, yeah, we need to talk, let's go from there, or they get this negative reaction of, how did you gain access to all our passwords, right? And this type of situation. How have you seen your partners that have partnered with ID Agent battle that? And 2, how have they properly prospected with dark web monitoring as in their disposal to try and emphasize the gravity of that situation, that, you know, they do have some or a lot of credentials that are exposed out there?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And yeah, it's been something we've dealt with from day one. And it's one of the reasons we have a channel success manager for every partner, is that we want you to be trained on how to speak to these reports, because yes, there's always a chance that you could get a negative reaction. So what, it's thinking back to the origins of this. We have a live prospecting tool. I mentioned it earlier when I was using that for enterprise. Well, man, I can tell you, Kevin and I went back and forth, and he was losing sleep over whether to give access to MSPs this live prospecting tool, because there's a responsibility with it, right? You're pulling up people's compromised credentials. So one of the things we ended up doing is masking the passwords after 4 characters for privacy reasons, because not in the ongoing monitoring of your own customers, but when you were pulling up a prospect who you don't have a relationship with, it's not going to show you the full clear text password. But trust me, 4 characters is enough to have a conversation around it, and certainly somebody will recognize. So that was one of the early things that we recognized that was going to cause issues going into it. And then it really did come down to training. And so one of the things I talk about whenever I get the chance really with MSPs is, look, one, you should never hold the data hostage. And actually, before I go to the hostage part, what I would say is you should never send the report without an in-person meeting or a screen share, because one, they have no context for it. And so that is where you can get into negative situations. You should never copy and paste, parts of the report into the email, because it looks like a phishing email otherwise. Now, this may have changed since I was doing it, because when I was doing it, nobody was doing this other than really me at the time. What I originally did was I thought it was a fairly soft email, but I just said, look, this is what our company does. We do this dark web monitoring. We ran an initial scan. You have 37 exposures on the dark web. Would you like to jump on a call? I will show you the data and provide you the context. And that's how we got on all those Fortune 500 company conversations. However, and like I said, tip 1 being, don't send it without those in-person or screen shares. That being said, there are going to be people who just won't do that. They'll just be like, no, I want to see the data. And I've always been in the belief of, like, if you tried to get the meeting and they just refuse, but they don't want, but they still want to see the data, just give it to them. Because at the end of the day, you're not going to get into that conversation of, well, you're extorting me or something like that. 2, you're still providing them value, and maybe you move on from that person. And I'm telling you, more times than none, I've had that person come back to me when an incident's occurred. That entire state government I was telling you about, that is exactly what happened. And we actually had a conversation with them before, but we showed them all the data. We didn't hide anything. We gave them the full report, because the reality is that report is just a historical piece of time. And it has tremendous value if you've never seen what compromises are out there. But the reality and the way we need to talk about it is you have to have ongoing monitoring. Because just because you change your passwords from this report doesn't mean the next breach doesn't happen, or the next breach, or it's all about the ongoing monitoring. The report absolutely has value, but it's in how you position it, and that's we strongly train on providing that information, but really trying to get it in a one-on-one meeting or a screen share like we're talking today.
I always say that there are basically 2 types of companies: those that have been compromised and those that have not been compromised yet, or even knowingly compromised. But the reality is, as much security and stuff as we can put in place, or any company can put in place, at the end of the day, you can build the best mousetrap in the world. There's always going to be a smarter mouse that's going to get through that mousetrap. That's just the way it works. So a lot of people are, well, I do this, I do that. It doesn't matter what you do. You have to have another layer of security and another thing that you can look at. And I like what you're talking about there as far as ongoing, because things change all the time. Companies get compromised all the time. Companies get compromised that you don't hear about on the national news, on your local news, because there's people that don't want to talk about it. And again, a lot of those will put their head in the sand and say, you know what? Yeah, as long as nobody knows, we're okay. Well, that's not the issue anymore. And it's getting, a lot of people look at when they get compromised, they're like, well, what do these people get out of this? They get money, or they wouldn't be doing it. So there's that. I said, money is always going to be the greatest motivator when it comes to those things. And you're not going to stop that train from rolling. So you need to do something to protect yourself at this point and make sure that whatever's happening is not going to happen to you. And that's all you can really do. Again, don't be the low hanging fruit. Be somebody that's, knows what's going on out there, and so that they can take action at any given time.
Yeah. And that's actually a common question, Jeff, that we get is, why are hackers doing it? And certainly money is generally the biggest motivator for it. But there's interesting stories that we end up reading about where it's like, they are a hacker, but they're not necessarily like on this like criminal, like high criminal level that they're doing. But what'll happen is they'll warn a website. Like there was this youth hockey website a couple of years ago where a hacker said, look, you guys have no security on your platform. I'm giving you a warning. And he warned them like 3 times and they did nothing about it. And then after the 3rd time, he just exposed all their information. So some of it, sometimes it's just whatever. That was just his kicks that he got. Sometimes it's about proving yourself to become part of these other areas of the dark web. So there's, these chat forums, these different layers of the dark web where they're member based only, and you have to prove that you belong. Like there's different, there's like, to put it in Star Wars term, I'm sure there's a Jedi Master, forum that you only get access to if you're legitimately a Jedi Master. They're not going to let a Sith come in, but, and so sometimes it's just proving yourself. And that's why sometimes you see like this data is just sitting there for the taking, because sometimes they're just putting it out there to show, hey, I did this. I was able to do this. Other times, people take ethical stances. Ashley Madison is an example of that. So whoever was behind that ultimately decided that they wanted to take an ethical stand and say, this isn't right. And we're exposing everybody on Ashley Madison. And, truth be told, I think in some ways we're lucky they did that versus what they could have done, because they could have extorted government officials. There was 10,000 .mil and .gov emails exposed in the Ashley Madison. So imagine, the national security that could have been exposed there, because, if you're, I don't know what level, if you're a high level ranking person in the government and you were legitimately using that website, so they have a chance to potentially ruin your family environment, and you're going to lose your job potentially too. So, you're going to give up secrets. So I'd almost guarantee people would give up secrets to avoid those two things. And so, in some ways, it got very lucky that they didn't do stuff with it.
That is a good point. Yeah, because things could be a lot worse. It always amazes me that they had somebody would use their .mil or .gov email on these sites and not think, well, it's safe. At the end of the day, I tell people, if you want to be safe, unplug from the internet, throw your computers, your phones, whatever away, your iPods, all that stuff, get rid of all electronics. That is the only way that you're going to be potentially safe, because all that stuff that's connected it can be got into. That's just the way it is. That's the nature of the business. Wow.
And I haven't talked about the sextortion email in a long time, because I kind of retired this because I did it for a year, but it always kills at conferences. And if you're an MSP, you should still be talking about the sextortion email, because a lot of people still get it. I just spoke about it like 100 different times over the course of a year, so I kind of had to retire it. But it speaks to this message, and we believe pretty strongly that MSPs need to deliver a message that, yeah, you're a small business, and they're not specifically targeting you, but you're getting targeted based off of other breaches, and you're getting wrapped up in them. And so, that's where it's like you get exposed on LinkedIn. That's how you got exposed. And eventually they're going to use phishing tactics and things like that. But the sextortion one was really interesting to see how quickly and nimble they run their organizations, these dark web conglomerates, because what they did is they sent out an email saying, we caught you looking at adult content. So you think about the audience of people that they're sending that to. There's going to be a high percentage that have done that at some point in their life. So immediately you're gonna be like, oh my God, what are they talking about? And then, they said, and we've got you on camera and we're going to send it to all your contacts. So you had a lot. I've heard the stories from MSPs, people freaking out. Here's how they really made people freak out is they included the data from the LinkedIn breach. So they took the password and they they would put in the message, something alluding to, and here's your password. And even if you didn't use that password on whatever adult website they're like trying to claim, it's real password. So it freaks you out. Because if you've looked at adult content and now you're looking at somebody who says who's showing you your exact password that you may have used on 20 different sites, you start freaking out. And then of course, if you click on whatever email that they, the message that they're doing, it could lead to malware. They also made like the ransomware, after you've got the ransomware, they made it a reasonable price, like $300. Which is reasonable to pay to get out of this situation and things like that. So, those are really somewhat relatable stories that we believe that MSP should be sharing. And that's one of the things we do is when I do presentations, I try to give you guys example. We have analysts, we have snapshots from the dark web proving that small businesses are being targeted right there on the web, on the dark web. It's slide after slide. And we actually give our MSPs the same slide deck so that they can, because I know MSPs are tired of that conversation that, hey, I'm too small, I'm not a target.
There is no such thing as too small, in my opinion. I think that if there's money to be made or things to go against, it's going to happen. So, yeah, what Steve Gibson always security by obscurity. Yeah, it's not actually a thing. Because at the end of the day, too, when you talk about security practices and things that we do, a lot of times there is this, you want security, but you also want ease of use. So there's this balance, excuse me, there's this balancing act that you're constantly going back and forth with your customer. But if you can have that data to show them and put it in front of them, I would think they would tend to take things more seriously.
Yeah, no, and I would agree with that. And I'll preface slightly shameless plug here, but it'll come back around to what you're talking about. So, I mean, ID Agent, beyond just dark web monitoring, we do phishing simulation, security awareness training, and we just added a product called Passy, which is multi-factor authentication, single sign-on, and password manager. And it goes back to what you're saying, like 2FA, right? I mean, MSPs have been trying to get their customers to do that for the longest time. I'd argue now is the best time to deliver it 2FA, like, because one, MSPs have been stamped by the government as essential workers, and I think they should wear that very proudly, right? And at the end of the day, you're the expert, not your customer. And I think a lot of MSPs lack confidence when they talk about security. The approach that we really teach is you should be telling them that they need these things, not asking them. Like, I promise you, if you ask people if they want dark web monitoring, they don't. No one wants it. It's like, but they need it. And same thing with multi-factor authentication. And I get it. We all don't like doing things that make it harder. But with our product, you have a single sign-on launchpad that actually makes it a lot easier in some ways, because then I'm already logged into all these websites from a single launchpad. And so in some ways, there's things that are a little harder on the user, but there's other ways that are easier. And then as an owner of a small business, if I know all my employees are logging in with their work email through this launchpad, I now have visibility into where they're logging in, which is critical when you talk about the policies around, onboarding and offboarding and policies. So you know exactly where they're using their credentials.
Man, that's good info there. Paco, when you look at what your clients are doing, I know we've talked about this before when it comes to password management and all this other kind of stuff. What are your customers saying when you go, hey, we need to lock some things down, we need to have 2FA, we need to do these different things? What's kind of the pushback that you're getting?
If the
you're telling them that they need to do
this,
because I get this thing all the time where people will come to me, my Amazon account has been compromised. Yeah, we need to do something about that.
Sure.
Well, I don't want to do that because I wish things were a little more simplified between all the different groups that were out there, so you can make 2FA simple. I've ran into a problem before where I was using Google Authenticator, and I switched phones, and yeah, totally lost all my authentication off of Google. And the only thing you could do in that sense was if I printed out the 5 unique passwords, one-time passwords that you could use, I was okay. But, so now I started using I use LastPass, but I use LastPass Authenticator to do a lot of that stuff. But when it comes to trying to teach the customer what they need to do, like Matt's been saying, there's just all this pushback and nobody wants to learn anything. It's like, I know John Dubinsky has complained about this time and time again. People will go, well, I'm not a computer person. My rebuttal to that, my literal rebuttal is then get the blankety blank off the computer. That is my rebuttal, because it's like, then you don't need to be on the computer. Get off, because you're not a car person. I'm not, you might not be a car person, but you know how to put gas in your tank. You know how to put the key in and turn it on, or push the button, or put it in the drive and hit the accelerator and stop the brake. But you're not a car person, but you still know how to drive the car. So I don't get that argument. It's so frustrating.
Yeah, I guess I started thinking, sometimes it's just asking questions that lead them back to the answer you want, which is, are you comfortable losing your business over
that's good
over not implementing multi-factor authentication? And I think if you can bring it back to some of the security, like I think about, the fact that, hackers are going to want to go to the easiest targets. That is pretty well known fact. So you have to make it harder. Look, 2FA is not perfect, but I don't think it's that different than why you live in a residential area and you want to be the one that puts up that sign saying you've got a security system. It's not that you want them to necessarily break into the person next to you, but you just don't want them to go into your house. and that is a great, I have to imagine the stats on that are pretty high if people moving on to another place that doesn't have a security alarm set to it. And it's not that much different than 2FA, right? It's like, make it harder so that these scripts aren't immediately just getting into a network. You make it harder, they move on. Again, it's not perfect, but make it come up with relatable stories. One thing we have, and you don't have to be a partner of ours, which makes it a really great resource. We have something called the Week in Breach, and it talks about different breaches from across the world, because I can almost guarantee you, if you go into a manufacturing company and talk to them about the Target breach, it's not relatable. But we have examples from big ones to small ones. If you go into a manufacturing company and you show them a manufacturing company that got hit by ransomware and went out of business, now you're buying in their ballpark. So I think it's important to make these stories a little bit more relatable. I think that's probably one place where people misfire a little bit.
That's a great story. And I'll tell you, I have a practical story. When I first moved in this neighborhood, and it's not a bad neighborhood or anything like that, but what I noticed was this particular neighborhood, for whatever reason, doesn't have street lamps. And so I would come down the street going to the house that I was going to buy, and I potentially bought it. But what ended up happening was it was dark. The whole street was dark. So when I moved into the house, all my outside lights are on. I turned them on at night. Actually, I was running them 24/7 until I got some smart bulbs and basically put them in so that they would turn off during the day and turn on at night. And so when I started doing that, because mine was the only house lit up on the whole block, guess what everybody else started to do? They started turning on their street lights. So now when you come down my street 8 years later, you can actually see where you're going. It's amazing how that works. You can be influential and you didn't even know it. So no, that's good. Paco, did you come up with your story about your customers yet?
Oh yeah. I had my answer, but I want to let you guys ride. I think it really depends on how you're offering it, right? I think that, there are those that are, that's the bundle, right? And it's easier for a new client because it's, hey, here's what we're offering. This is what we're doing. I think the other piece of it too is that because a lot of these businesses now are signing insurance agreements when they're trying to get insured, that they have to meet some type of security framework, right? And having that as a go-to on, so for example, the NIST cybersecurity framework allows you to introduce a lot of these tools that otherwise they may say, no, we don't need it. But because as a requirement, to be saying that you are abiding to this framework allows us to make things a little bit easier. Now, for current customers, obviously that's where it becomes a little bit more difficult, but I think it becomes where the educational piece is what really helps in making that case. So for example, we have a client that, doesn't like his system to be locked and hates to type in his PIN on a Windows PC. Probably pretty simple for us to do all that. But the biggest piece for me to tell them is that, look, everyone can walk by into the PC. Someone can jump on here, walk into your door, do what they need to do. Would you prefer us not to wire $100,000 out of your account because someone thought that they just logged in and got what they wanted to do if they were physically there? It's the same premise if someone remotely was doing the same thing and emailed the office manager to do so. So it's those type of creating scenarios that are relatable. And then, as you mentioned, oh, well, we're small, we have really nothing to worry about. Well, I think it becomes when you start tallying up those numbers of who their customers are and if those records were exposed, then it becomes a much better idea of, wow, that's a dollar amount that you're applying to as far as a loss. Let's figure out what we want to do to kind of protect ourselves. So when it comes to whatever services that we offer, we try to bundle them as much as possible, because then it's like, hey, here's what you need. This is what we can offer. And it allows you to have those components in. So in this case, like dark web monitoring, an example would be you want to lump in whoever you're reselling for multi-factor authentication, who are you selling for password management, who you're selling for phishing simulation, spam, things of that nature, and then does that go on to your Office 365 or G Suite offering? So, you can get very creative of how you offer it, or you can do it a la carte if you know the product and you know the word track to be able to explain to them, hey, this is what we really need, or hey, here's your cybersecurity bundle. This is what we have, and this is how we're going to keep you safe. Because obviously selling the solution to the problem is always going to be 10 times easier than saying you need this tool to help you become secure.
That's very good. And I like, Matt, what you were saying about basically everybody, they need to use the service regardless of whether they don't need to ask. You don't need to ask them. You need to tell them that, hey, here's what you need. And as Paco's saying, hey, if you roll that all into a bundle and go, here's what we're providing, we're just going to provide you everything. Because at the end of the day, like I said in the beginning, you want to protect your customer and you want to make sure that they are safe as you possibly can make them over the long haul. And whatever tools you need to put in place and do that, you're going to go ahead and do that.
Yeah. And I'll share a pretty wild story with an MSP who took that confidence and said, we need to do this. So, and it's pretty crazy because I'd never thought of using phishing simulations in this manner in terms of using it as a prospecting tool within your own customer base. So he had this break fix customer of 10 years. And I don't know what made the conversation happen, but he ultimately went in and said, look, I have no idea what level of security awareness your employees have. We need to run a phishing simulation, right? So need to, not didn't ask. And, they were agreeable. I mean, at the end of the day, they still have to agree to it. You shouldn't just run a phishing simulation without permission. but again, he didn't ask. He went in assuming with the assumption that this was going to be fine. And they did a phishing simulation, and 92% of those 25 employees clicked on the email, which is really bad, but it gets much worse. So we actually have this thing where you can actually submit data. It's essentially submitting your credentials. We don't store it, but we track it. So 54% of those employees submitted their credentials. And so he walked back in with that report, plus the credentials exposed on the dark web. And again, think about how empowering this is. I mean, the confidence that you would have going into this meeting is like through the roof. And he walked out with a 3-year contract worth $252,000. So break fix customer 10 years. And look, it's not obviously always going to work out as beautifully as that did, but that started with the confidence to say, you need this. I'm the expert. Not, you don't say this out loud to them, but you're paying me. I mean, sometimes you have to be a little blunt with your customers, be like, you're paying me to be the expert. And I would say, if you're getting pushback on some of those security things that you believe are necessary, We've been a strong proponent. I think we were one of the first vendors to push out, which we call a decline of service agreement. And I totally understand not every MSP is comfortable doing this, but it's been unbelievably successful for our partners, where it's like, okay, I just educated you on why dark web monitoring or why these services are necessary. You're choosing to not move forward with it. I need you to sign this waiver. And I'm not a lawyer. I don't know if it'll all hold up in court or anything like that. But two things come to mind. One, MSP or people don't like signing decline of service because then they're going to feel, legally or not, they're going to feel like the onus is on them now. And we've had just unbelievable success stories of like 90% of a customer base buying in and saying, okay, we're going to move forward with this. We're not signing a decline of service. We'll move forward with what your recommendation is. And I think you do need to cover yourself. And again, I don't know all the legalities of it, but I think if you're an MSP owner and you've been an MSP owner in this space, you've seen the articles or the news presses when something happens to your customer, they blame you first. And even though you've been telling them for years to do security awareness training or 2FA, you're the first person they're going to blame if they have a security issue. So,
and I like that because a lot of times you get that information out there and in front of them. I think a lot of times MSPs run into a problem where they don't understand or they don't give the client what their actual scope is. So the client will assume always that you're covering everything. Whatever they see on the news tomorrow, you're doing that. And so if they don't know that they're not paying for those services, I think it's great to have an agreement that says, hey, or a waiver saying, hey, you decline these services. Because at the end of the day, at least it gives you something to stand on and go, I warned them. What more did you want me to do? What could I have possibly done? And I think regardless of the legality or whatever, that's still going to be a piece of paper that would still be admissible in court and to go, this is what I said. And they didn't want to do it. And I think most common sense judges are going to go, oh, well, they gave you this. Why didn't you do it? And then it goes, at least the conversation goes back to them and the finger goes, hey, why didn't you do this when you knew that this could happen?
Right. I think also kind of keying back from what Matt and you said, and even back to when Liz Pifko was on our show before, having that document as an e-document as well may help you out in that process as well, because it was viewed, you can track, and it'd be a little bit easier if you can get that document as an e-document on that decline of service. But kind of pivoting a little bit on why this should be offered and things of that nature. This is actually more of a call to action to the audience is, we are in the last 2 months or a little less than 2 months of the year. Right. And I'm a personal believer of this is upsell season, because I feel that a lot of new businesses don't really make that big of a decision. I mean, there are those that do, but I feel that this is a time for where you should have a little bit more downtime because of the holidays. It allows you to retool some things, but it also gives you the ability to do a lot of upselling for services and things that you have. And I think I would really encourage those to really try and figure out what's the best way for me to get a little bit more business in the last 2 months. And I think doing this, like dark web monitoring, phishing, scheduling a phishing simulation, if you haven't had your annual business meeting or quarterly business review with your clients, having the ability of doing some type of prospecting, upselling, or a tool to do some research to provide back a report or some type of findings will help bring in a little bit of either an increased service offering, or even if you're doing it a la carte, having that piece as a recurring monthly income. I think that's really what the next 2 months should really be about. And I would encourage those that, if you're focusing on security, and obviously everyone is kind of just lax or just doesn't know where to start, I think that's where the best piece is to start with your own customers, because you're already in the doors, you already have the conversations. And for those that, perfect example, like how Matt mentioned, you have a break fix client that either hasn't been responsive to you, or you've talked about being on a monthly recurring agreement, this is a great opportunity to do something like this, show them, and then you can decide, is this customer worth for me to keep on? Or is this, I need to concentrate my time on others that really could use the service and my own expertise in dealing with some of these things.
Very good. That's good advice. All right, let's take a real quick break. And Matt, go ahead and gather up any last thoughts, anything that we didn't cover so far that you want to, give to the audience at this point. I think this subject, I think, could go on and on and on. And I'm sure with all your things that you've done over the years, it's a never ending topic. So we'll get back to that in just a second. All right. If you would like to support what we're doing here and support our show, I would encourage you to go to patreon.com/MSP Unplugged. And with that, you will get a entrance to the free, or I shouldn't say free, the super secret Facebook group for about $1 a show. We do 4 to 5 shows a month. It's $4 to $5. Skip a cup of coffee at Starbucks and you can pay for that. It helps us finance the things that we're doing here and put some things together so that down the road we can do some pretty great things for the community and and have everybody included in that. So anyways, if you'd like to support us, go over to patreon.com/MSP Unplugged. And I want to thank all of our Patreon supporters that continuously support us on a regular basis. We really appreciate it. And thank you for doing that. All right, Matt, any final thoughts on anything that we didn't cover thus far as what people need to be thinking about when it comes to,
Sure.
any of that stuff, any of the stuff we talked about so far? It's a lot.
Yeah, no, we covered a lot. I mean, I think I would just echo kind of Paco's sentiments at the end, around the QBRs. That's a great opportunity to have these conversations. I know from talking with MSPs on a daily basis, QBRs sometimes are a struggle. Having these reports to be, presented in those are a great opportunity. We had an MSP. Look, the security landscape is constantly changing. Dark web monitoring wasn't even a thing before we entered the market in 2017. And so educating your customers that the security stack is going to continually change, and it may cost more money. That's just the reality of keeping businesses safe. And I think they're starting to understand that better. But explaining that, setting their expectations in the QBRs, I think is important. We had an MSP, he had an $18,000 in monthly reoccurring revenue from his own customer base because he decided, I'm coming out with 2 levels of security, base level and a security plus. And this isn't even an option. If you want to remain my client, you have to buy into this because otherwise I can't secure you. And he, again, added that within his own customer base. And I thought the cool thing is that he's now taking that message to any new customer, of course, or prospect. He's not taking them on if they don't buy into these things. And so, his whatever he's signing these new customers, he's coming in at a higher level from an MRR standpoint. And so, that is something I think I would leave the audience with in terms of QBRs. And I guess the last part I would add, and I come from a sales and marketing background, and I know you're going to have my colleague, Dan Tomaszewski, on here at some point. Leverage your partners if they have sales enablement programs. And I can tell you, ID Agent, I feel like we set the bar. I'm not just saying it. I really know that we set the bar high, and we've seen a lot of other vendors really adopt to the model that we've done. And to Kaseya's credit, when we got acquired by ID Agent, it was when they acquired ID Agent, one of the big things that they took from us and said, we need to run this across every business unit is our partner program. And so now under Kaseya, if you have IT Glue, rapid fire tools, ID Agent, you're getting all of this sales enablement, all the sales training, the customer's success person. You get all of that, and Dan will deep dive into that stuff with you guys. But utilize it. It's all sitting there for the taking. We've literally got the decline of service already done for you. So we're taking you 95% of the way on all these marketing materials. And now we actually just came out with something where you can actually, at a higher level, get the source files of these marketing materials. So you can really customize it. But again, we've done 95% of the work for you. The last 5% is just you customizing it in the way that you want to. But not just us, utilize your other vendors and blend things together. Security and backup go really well together in a conversation. We've done events with, competitive backup companies because that was what the customer wanted. So we appeared with this other company that's not Kaseya, and that's fine because at the end of the day, it's about the customer, the partner, which is our MSP. So I can't encourage that enough to leverage your partner's sales enablement programs.
That's awesome. And Paco, could you run your business without being able to leverage your vendors?
Absolutely not. I think that outsourcing is the game. No, I'm kidding. No, I think it's having partners, and that's what I'm a big proponent of what Matt said. I've mentioned that many times in the past on several shows, especially now. If you don't have money, if you don't have the ability to hire a marketing company, if you don't have the ability to get some sales things going, leverage your partners. A lot of our partners have a lot of these sale enablements, marketing materials, resources that are available to you. And if you don't know, ask. I mean, everyone either has a support line or a rep that you're working with. I could not be where I am now without the leveraging of my partners to grow from a single one-man shop to having multiple employees and trying to leverage, and even leveraging and delegating to different people has become much difficult because I've ran it in such a way, and leveraging my partners to help me understand what's the best way of doing that. So yes, leaning on your vendors, leaning on your partners are really going to be the best way to do so. I can say it more than that.
Very, very good. Very well said. All right, Matt. Well, I appreciate you coming out today and sharing with us. It has been an awesome conversation. I enjoyed learning some of the things and hearing some of the stories from your background and also different things you've heard out in the MSP community. And it's been very worthwhile. If people want to find out more about you, get in contact with you, find out more about ID Agent, how would they go about that?
Sure. As far as setting up a demo with ID Agent, kind of the easiest way is just going to our website, and there's a Become a Partner tab, and you just put in your information to schedule a demo. As far as myself, I'm extremely active on LinkedIn. I really try to bring thought leadership from sales and marketing perspective for an MSP. So I would strongly encourage if people like what I'm saying about security sales, like connect with me on LinkedIn. I utilize it, and I try to, as I learn or I make mistakes, I try to share those stories. And trust me, I fail all the time on LinkedIn in terms of putting out things, but that's how you learn. You gotta put yourself out there.
Very excellent points. Well, again, I appreciate you coming out and sharing with us today. It's been awesome.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Paco, if people wanted to find out more about you and where you're at and what you're up to, where would they go?
So a couple things before I get into all that.
Oh, I totally forgot. Thank you for bringing that up. Yeah. Go ahead.
One, I highly encourage everyone to connect with Matt on LinkedIn. He has a lot of great live streams that he has done with Dan and himself. He actually does a lot of frequent MSP hot seats episodes lately that have been really great for some content, just hearing from other peers. So I definitely suggest you connect with him, see what he puts out. We've known each other for many years here on a professional level, and puts a lot of great information. He is very passionate about the channel. So I just want to make sure that not only just on ID Agent's side, Kaseya's side, but as far as with Matt, definitely connect with him so you could see a lot of the content he's doing for those companies and for himself as well. Two, supporting the podcast, as Jeff mentioned, you would have gained access to the private Facebook group, which you would have had early access to some information that we announced yesterday. So yesterday we announced, and along with sending out a newsletter, we are happy to announce that TechCon Unplugged 2021 is officially back September 17th to 19th in Chicago, which is actually going to be in Rosemont, Illinois, because of the outskirts and all the fun stuff that's going on here in Chicago. But it's going to be in the Aloft Hotel, and tickets are now officially on sale. So we mentioned on the previous weeks that we had a lot of conversation of, should we let you know when the event's happening, where it's going to be? Everyone said they wanted to know now before tickets were available. I'm happy to announce that with our help with Matt over at Tech Marketing Engine, everything is live, everything's good to go. So if this is the first time you're hearing this, whether it's on the live show or on the audio podcast as it's released, go to techconunplugged.com. Purchase your ticket, and we will see you there. Again, we are keeping our eyes on the safety guidelines and precautions with everything that's kind of happening now in the world. So we will make sure to keep everyone up to date as the event goes. But our plan is, with the limitations that we have, we're going to keep moving forward and help replicate what we did back in 2019. So outside of all that, and my call to action as my shameless plug, you can find us here on this fine programming every Friday at noon Eastern Standard Time now, as we're off of daylight savings time, which is an inside joke for those that watch mine and Jeff's constant banter. But that's where you'll be able to find me, or you can always connect with me over on LinkedIn and some various things that I do here and there.
Awesome. Great to have you, and great to have your input. And thank you for reminding me about that whole thing. And I just want to say, before we get on out of here, I'm going to preface some things. Paco has jumped through hoops of fire to get the types of deals that he put together for you all. And that would be getting a hotel room. We got these what was the price on a hotel room?
I think they wanted like $159 a night.
I think, yeah, $159 a night was what they wanted. They're like, oh, it's a standard in this area. And Paco was like, no, it ain't. And so what did they get?
So not only did we knock them down from the price of $159 to $124 a night, listening from our audience from before, the biggest concern for Chicago is parking, no matter where you are, right? And whether it's downtown and several other areas, well, we were actually able to get the parking complimentary for our attendees that are attending those 3 days at the hotel as well.
Yeah, I'm telling you, that is a heck of a deal. You're not going to find anything cheaper or better out there as far as, great content, great times together, and also food, which everybody loved last time. And it's a great area. We'll have a lot of information on the website coming up here shortly as we've kind of worked on some things. We'll have some things from last year that we'll kind of be putting forward into what we're going to do or I guess this year. I keep wanting to say last year, like this whole thing is just gone in a way, but it's not.
No, not yet.
But we have high hopes for 2021 as far as becoming the end of the year and all that kind of stuff. And we should be fine by that point. I would imagine. If not, we have way other things to worry about.
Exactly. And then, yeah, like you said, we're going to have a lot of familiar faces returning. Partners of ours that had supported us in the past. We will have some new faces that will be showing up as well. It's a constant ongoing development, but yeah, I mean, we're hoping to replicate what we did in Grand Rapids. Again, we really just wanted to make sure convenience was a factor, making sure attendees were able to enjoy themselves, and that there was a donut shop nearby for all the Matt Rainey followers on getting some great custom donuts.
Awesome. And there will be, we have, I just lost my train of thought. It doesn't really matter. Anyways, let's get on out of here. Go to TechNut and get that information there, and it will become. Oh, I know what I was going to say. Tickets we've already sold some tickets. Like as soon as the newsletter went out, tickets were sold. So what I want to say to people out there is we don't know what types of restrictions we may or may not run into during that time period as far as the amount of people we can have. So what I would ask you to do is I would ask you to go ahead and, get those tickets purchased as soon as possible. All right. I think with that, if you want to watch live and hang out in the chat room over on youtube.com/MSP Unplugged, you can do that. You can also subscribe and hit that notification button so you never miss an episode. Or if you listen to the audio version, you can use your favorite podcasting app to take us with you wherever you go. I want to thank you for listening. We'll see you next time on MSP Unplugged.